Up next, we have the huddle on preparing Gen Z and Gen Alpha, an urgent and important task that requires focused attention from our talent custodians. This discussion will be moderated by Anustup Nayak. Anustup is the project director, Central Square Foundation. He gave up a corporate career spanning consulting, strategy, IT, and policy in the US to pursue his interest in education. He now leads the classroom instruction and practice team at CSF, a nonprofit that ensures high quality school education for all children in India. Over the last decade, he has also played key roles in building various aspects of Exceed Education's work, spanning advocacy, assessment, product development, and talent management. He brings 20 years of on-ground experience in education reform to our discussion today. Welcome, Anustup. Always a pleasure to see you. And over to you to introduce our speakers for this super session on understanding the first generation that's digitally native.
Thank you, Nikhil, for that very kind introduction. I'm very, very excited to be part of this conversation, and equally excited that we have a very distinguished panel of experts who bring very relevant experience, very diverse set of backgrounds. And I'm also equally excited to see almost 80 attendees. I hope we'll get active participation from everyone. Before I get started, I want to just give a quick understanding of where we are coming from today. As many of you know, the millennials are the hottest generation which are shaping the world of today. As we talk about our society, as we talk about the workplace, as we talk about environment, there isn't an area where we are actively thinking of how young people are going to shape the opinions, thoughts, and actions. Millennials witnessed the world change from typewriters to keyboards. They're the first generation to be christened digital natives. Now young adults are going to shape the world. So we must find a way to see what does it mean to be a young person at the workplace today? What does it mean for the workplace to nurture such minds? And I'm delighted to introduce some of the finest minds of our generation. Manika Sharma, who is the director of the Shri schools. Manika is a career educator spanning 3 decades. Manika has been inherently very, very involved and in subjects like instructional leadership, team building, critical thinking. She's also very, very passionate about education and continues to positively impact the lives of students at one of the finest institutions in our country. Manika has conducted a lot of leadership and motivational sessions for teachers and for school leaders across the country. Welcome, Manika, to Bridge. I'm also delighted to introduce Neharika Vohra, who is the Vice Chancellor of the Delhi Skills and Entrepreneurship University. I must admit, delighted to see Neharika, who I happen to know from the time I was a child. So a bit intimidated having Neharika in the mix. Neharika is, as I said, currently working on the setup of the newly instituted Delhi Skills and Entrepreneurship University, and she's had a stellar stint at IIM Ahmedabad, where for 2 decades she was a faculty member. Her research on organizational behavior, change management, education leadership, and gender issues are very, very prominent for anyone who's studied the domain. She's now working very effectively on integrating skills and entrepreneurship into our the whole workplace setup. I'm also excited to welcome Parmesh Sani. Parmesh is arguably one of the most interesting and finest young minds I have had the opportunity to know. Parmesh has a very, very diverse background. As the director of the Godrej India Culture Lab, Parmesh has pioneered an experimental space that brings together academia, activism, business, and the arts through events in Mumbai. He is also an active advocate for LGBTQ plus rights and queer inclusivity in the corporate world. He has released a fantastic book on this subject, and he has been a TED Senior Fellow, World Economic Forum Young Global Leader, a Yale World Fellow, and a graduate of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Welcome, Parmesh. Very, very happy to have you all. And I'll also would love for the audience to interact with us. So we as a panel have decided to cut short our speaking time to almost half of the allotted time so that we can include your voice, your questions, your thoughts into the conversation. So without much ado, I'd like to roll the ball off with Parmesh. Parmesh, tell us, you've got this very, very interesting background. You've had this very interesting journey starting from media. You've been in business, in innovation. What I find fascinating about you is also you've been a teacher in a school. So tell us a little bit about a couple of things I'm very curious to know about. Tell us about some of the early experiences, because you represent the generation that we are talking about. You also experience a lot of their struggles, a lot of their aspirations. Tell us a little bit about your own journey. Tell us a little bit about the young people you experience around you, especially people with alternative identities. You've done a lot of work with young people in the LGBTQ community who you have really advocated for, and would love to know what does it feel like to be in your shoes?
Thanks so much, Anustup, and also just want to say thanks to Pramad, everyone at Harappa. Just love what you are doing, and just so grateful to be on this panel with Manika, Neharika, and you, and learn alongside all of you. My journey, I mean, I just look back and I'm filled with incredible, the word that comes to my mind is just the incredible generosity that I've received. And it goes back all the way to my first standard class teacher, Miss Arokia's family at St. Joseph's Colaba, who gave so much of my time and effort and love. And this is continued in educational spaces like MIT with professors like Henry Jenkins, who was a guru in every sense, or the vice president of the university when I joined, Professor Catherine Wilmore, who literally took someone who was fresh off the boat and gave me the confidence that I could pull off South Asia's biggest LGBTQ film festival on the MIT campus, and helped push me in the right direction, help find funds, and actually help make it happen. Or the fact that me as a foreign student in a place like the US could avail of a scholarship and have the privilege to actually have this degree, right? And the generosity is continued with, with my bosses, whether it was my first boss who actually just passed away, Shashi Baliga from the Times of India group, who took a call on me as an 18-year-old and said, you can be a journalist because you have the right attitude and skills can be taught. And also the generosity of all the people who I've, as a writer, as a nonfiction writer, I've interviewed, who give you their stories, who share their experiences with you. And I've tried, it's kind of fundamentally shaped me in how I work and what I do at work, which is really connect the dots between people and ideas. And what I did at MIT, which was applied humanities, which I think we're going to see a lot more of in our world. And, Neharika, Manika are educational experts in that sense. But I think we're going to see a lot of this cross-pollination across disciplines at work in educating future generations, because I think the time of us studying in silos is very over. But also with me, in terms of formative experiences, I would say, and this comes from my own experience as an LGBTQ person, isn't just being conscious of whose voices are not being heard. As we go on this educational journey, right? Whose stories are not being told? And what if they were? How much more enriching would all our lives be? I know for a fact that me as a queer person, if I grew up seeing more queer role models, my journey would have been a lot easier. Instead, every book that I opened, every book that I opened, everywhere that I went, every media that I looked at, I was not seeing queer role models, whereas heterosexual people were seeing so many role models, and it made their journey to education easier. And I would say the same is for any minority. If you look at a person with disabilities, where are the role models, either in class, in other institutions, and so on? Women itself, 50% of the population, so little representation, in whether in STEM, whether in visibility, anywhere else, right? LGBTQ, Dalit, whichever manifestation you look in terms of how our society is outside, I think just my own experience as a queer person growing up and going on this crazy journey made me very conscious. And hence, I've tried very much, and whatever I do is to kind of create platforms in which one can bring in a range of voices, both in academic spaces, but also within the workplace at Godrej and otherwise. So that's been, my journey, and in terms of the values which have shaped me. So.
No, thank you for sharing your journey, Parmesh. I think your journey is really the manifestation of a lot of aspirations that young people have today. And I'll come back to you in a minute, but I want to go to Manika, and since Parmesh mentioned this touching story of a teacher who's made or a couple of teachers who's made a big difference in his life. So I want to turn to the teacher, the school teacher, and the school leader amongst us. So you meet a lot of young people, arguably very bright, aspirational at the schools you run, especially in their adolescence, early adolescence, late adolescence. So tell us a little bit about what are their aspirations, what are their struggles, what does it feel like to be someone who is getting to be at the cusp of higher education, thinking about their careers, their personal challenges of growing up in this world?
Thank you so much. Thanks for that question. Yeah, it's very challenging times, more so even since the last 18 months for our children. But, nothing has changed really, because for the children, the competition, their peers, they want to prove themselves, okay? They need to find their why. How do they manage themselves? They need to develop that inquiring mind, the ability to work in groups, acceptance. I loved what Parmesh also mentioned, just acceptance, being accepted wherever you come from, whoever you are. All schools today, of course, have a very heterogeneous community, and and the class structure is such. But still, I find that young adolescents, 16 to 17-year-olds, they still need to find their why. And I think schools have a huge role to play to be heard, to be accepted, the right to question. And that's what we at the Shri Ram School do, try very hard, just to give them independence of thinking, the freedom to explore. They need to pursue their passion, their choices. They don't need to be straitjacketed. And I think that, again, comes from the society, the parenting, the schooling. The ability to think and work independently, to chase their dreams. It's very hard. See, if you go back when we were growing up, it was just so different, There weren't the bouquet of choices that the students of today have, starting from what is the board that they want to pursue. What is the school leaving board? When I'm not talking to everyone's not in education. So school leaving board. So do they want to pursue an international baccalaureate program? Do they want to graduate from a CBSE school? Do they want to graduate from a National Indian Open School? Because obviously when children are, come with different abilities. Or is it ICSE, ISC? Now look at the choices before the child who hasn't experienced anything so far. Neither have their parents. So where does the school come in? So schools like ours come into that space to say, okay, here we are, your guiding light. And we need to just advise, where do you fit? It can't be a square peg in a round hole. So for the children, the challenges are huge. The sense of social responsibility, that is also huge. We must instill in them that sense of social responsibility. I come from that space. Student-teacher ratios play a huge role in how we mentor and guide our children, because if the class sizes are huge, then obviously the connect time, the contact time between the teacher and the taught obviously comes down, right? So for good progressive schools, we need to take cognizance of the fact that we need to be there for every child. And the children are going through a lot.
No, it's a great opening, and I want to weave in a question from someone in the audience today, that why do we fail to teach our children to deal with something that is average? Why do we always live in a superlative world and be the best, right? And I want to bring in Neharika here. I want to open with that to you with a question from the audience. Neharika, you also happen to experience young people at 2 or 3 different junctures in their lives, right? You meet a lot of young people who are joining your MBA program, arguably the best and brightest and very, very driven with arguably the top, whatever, 0.1 percentile. Then you probably teach executive education programs where you meet people who are slightly more advanced in their careers. So what are some of the disappointments? What are some of the struggles, like our audience member is asking, that when do these overachievers come in contact with the world, which is less than extraordinary? What happens then?
Thank you, Anustup, for the question. I think, very often when we start the program at IIM Ahmedabad, in a tongue-in-cheek manner, we say, well, you're the cream of the cream. But they're only the cream of the cream because they were the privileged lot, right? When we go into any environment, I see some really young, bright kids who, if they had the same opportunities as our students had, would beat these students hands down. So we are very lucky that we actually have a very small cream, if you really look at it. So the cream of the cream is there because our cream is really, it's a thin layer. It's not a very thick layer. And so I think and I think human mind is such that it will only look at whatever data is available to it and kind of make sense of it. Even though we know there's a lot of other data, we don't have the capacity to always look at every single data. We are biased by nature. We take whatever comes to us and we look at it. And I think it is this nature of our biasness which actually makes us also sometimes look at people who are successful, or people who have had whatever you might see, whatever we might call as success, and we end up saying, oh, this is the only reality, right? Well, that isn't. Even for that successful person, what you know of is a very small piece of their story. Yeah. When I meet my own students, there's a course that I run, which is called the Explorations in Role and Identity, where we actually say, forget about all your books, forget about everything. It is not even funny how many of these students actually feel that they are imposters. They're not confident about themselves, and they actually feel the burden of the brand they carry. It's almost like they can't fail. So I think it is us educators who are very lazy when we only focus on success, or the best. I think it is much more difficult to look at everything else that is beneath it. So again, I think with the way our next generation is, or the coming generation is, or Alpha Z, whatever you want, Z generation, Alpha generation, whatever you might want to call it, whatever label we want to ascribe to it, the reality is that many of them today are going to go into a world where many of the jobs that they will be required to do don't even exist today. Because studies are showing that in 50%, in less than 5 to 6 years, the balance of people versus machines in the organizations is going to be 50-50. Yeah. So we are looking at a very, very different future. And so if the generation Alpha needs to prepare itself, it is not to prepare itself by saying, I'm this successful person, but it is to say, do I have the capacity to learn and adapt and be resilient no matter what comes my way? So I think I don't believe in this episodic success. at all.
So that's a great point that very often when we start out at the beginning of our journeys, and especially through our education, we are trying to think that education is like a sprint, 100 meters race, and there are winners
Yes.
and losers, and then when you complete that 100 meters race, you find that many marathons ahead. And with that, I want to also request the Harappa team to launch a poll. We'd love to hear from the audience. What do you really think about some of the success factors in the outside world? So there are a couple of questions we have for you. One is, what will be the essential characteristics of Gen Alpha? Is it that we have an kind of an enhanced tech-enhanced life, take longer to take on adult responsibilities, stay in education for longer periods, self-employment? And the second is, what does Generation Z value the most? Economic security, proactive communication, strong connections, transparency. Would love to hear your responses to these questions, and we will share this in a moment with the panel as we come back. But I'm going to come back to Parmesh. Parmesh, the flip side of this is the following, right? And I want to sort of share some of the research about the mindset of Generation Z and Generation Alpha. So they're very socially focused, very passionate about social justice issues. They prioritize financial security and value economic security and communication and transparency. So this is a highly aspirational generation. So what does it take on the other side, which means the leaders, the managers, the organizations to nurture this talent? And you've done a lot of work in developing organizations to be more creative.
Thanks. Yeah, I think, so first of all, I think what Gen Z and Alpha both care a lot about older people not talking about them. So, and none of us are Gen Z or Alpha, I think. So I think if there was anyone here, they would just say, okay, boomer, shut up, and ask us to shut up. So,
True.
I offer my thoughts just very tentatively with great love and respect for all the Gen Z Alpha people listening. And I think in all the work I've done in terms of skills and mindsets needed, but before that, it's about what this generation really cares about. And the poll was very interesting because we saw, a range of responses in the results that just came up. But at least in my experience, the Gen Z and Alpha both really care about authenticity, and they really want to walk the talk themselves, and they want the institutions that they engage with, whether it is their parents, whether it is their schools or colleges, or whether it is their eventual workplaces, to really, really not give them BS. And I can tell you in terms of, right, because they can see it, right? They can see that there are situations in which people are being exploited, in which some are becoming, in which the rich are becoming richer and the underprivileged are not. Or with regard to what I work on, which is LGBTQ issues, LGBTQ people who are in Gen Z and Alpha are potential employees, are or current employees, are customers, are buyers of goods and services, etc. And they see every June there are, colleges, schools, companies will all suddenly wake up in June and realize that there are LGBTQ people, and everyone will do a pride event, and everyone will put their logo in rainbow colors. But suddenly in July, they will forget all about LGBTQ people, as if the 6 to 10% of us in the world don't exist. And if you dig just below the surface, you will realize that many of these organizations don't even offer their own employees basic benefits like same-sex partnership benefits or whatever, right? I have spoken at colleges about the importance of LGBTQ inclusion, but when I've asked, do you offer your own professors? Are your professors who are queer, do their spouses have benefits? Do you offer gender affirmation surgery and all that? There's silence because they're not even thought about it, right? So like this, Gen Z, Alpha, etc., really care about you walking the talk. And so I think for both us, people who are helping build those skills, as well as for them, I think building on what Neharika said about resilience, What I've realized is that in terms of what we need to work on are empathy, which is how do we, because at 45, I feel really old, right? How do we connect to younger people, give them a sense of, because empathy is not taught, unfortunately, in most spaces, right? How do we convey to them that we will never know what it is like to walk in your shoes, you will never know what it's like to walk in ours, but how can we bridge this divide and connect and find commonalities, so that we can work together. Gen Z and Alpha have passion and idealism, but very little power. And older people have a lot of power, but don't really understand how rapidly the world is changing, right? And this is true for any power group, whether it's straight men, whether it's able-bodied people, whether it's upper caste people, and so on, right? So how do we get various people the sense of, how can we build on empathy in various categories of people so that we can move towards a better, less unequal, more inclusive world? I think empathy is something that we should really be focusing on creating. And what I've tried to create in my own teams is a sense of jugaad, which is, we really need to get things done. So less of an engineering mindset and more of a IDEO style kind of rapid prototyping, get things done kind of, a design thinking mindset, as skills that I've tried to cultivate in my teams.
Great, thank you for that. I think thank you for sharing that example of what you are trying to do in your team as well, because very often, this talk and advice is cheap, but to lead with action is harder. I'll come back to you with a slightly sort of difficult question later on and you can think about it, that is this a generation which is also on the flip side a bit more obsessed with their own needs, and is this a generation also less willing to think about the world which from the other view as well, right? The organization's point of view and so on. This is sort of like a restless generation. So I'll come back to you while you think about it. I'll move to Manika and build on something that Parmesh said. Manika, one way to think about education is, of course, the kind of excellent institutions that you run, right? The Shri School obviously is arguably one of the most progressive, one of the most innovative institutions across the board. But in my experience, that's an exception and that's not the norm. So what's happening across educational institutions across the country? What is it that we are preparing children for in our educational institutions, especially in middle school, high school? What are they getting out of that system, and what do you think are they missing out on, which is what the world needs from them later in life?
It's a very good question. So what are we preparing? Yes, Shri School is a standalone school probably, and just a few others who, stand head to head with us, shoulder to shoulder. But if I look at education across, I would start with the word empathy that Parmesh used. Schools across need to build in children empathy, compassion, and high EQ. You see, children need to have resilience. In this race of academics, marks monsters, as we call them, somewhere mentoring in children gets lost. Social emotional counselors are the need of the day. Children need to be able to express themselves. The more they express, the more they articulate, the better the relationship with the community, with their peers, with their teachers. For example, I love this discussion, the way it's flowing. For example, going back to what Parmesh again touched upon, how many students today have the freedom to say, I would like to do a story on LGBT and I would like to hold an assembly, all right? And to talk to my fellow students. At Shri we do it. We do it because we have our ear to the ground. We know it's a need. We know that they need to be able to talk about it to their peers, to the other students. Otherwise, they'll be talking in whispers and in corridors. When children come to us and say, we would like to express in the school magazine, in this annual magazine, we allow them to do so. I think freedom of speech, freedom to explore, just the freedom to be able to be themselves. You see, today's Gen X, Gen Alpha, like Neharika said, whatever you call them, they're a different bunch of kids. They know their mind. We first of all, we as schools teach them and allow them to say, okay, be yourself, say as you feel it. We are there to support you, right? And then we crush them when it's time for them to leave the portals of the school by now not allowing them what is right, what is wrong. They know better than some of us what is right and what is wrong. What are they looking for? They are very aspirational. They're also socially very conscious. I feel that the children of today are very sensitive. They like to work outside of school. They like to take up projects with their peers. They like to be ambassadors of what the school stands for and believes in, for the value system that they come from. So I do believe that we need to be able to hold our children, not cocoon them, not cushion them, but guide them in the right direction. See, there are many children I see now, after completing their school years, they say, we want to take a gap year. We want to explore the world. We don't want to get into college right away. We need to encourage such minds. Who knows? You know, there's a seed within them that they want to say, okay, I want to explore and I want to experience this before I get into the rut of college. So we need to come with open minds. Teachers, educators across the world need to understand what's plaguing the education system. We need to have think tanks. In fact, I've always believed that any decision that schools take, students must be a part of that decision. Include them, embrace their ideas, because it's about them. So leadership starts from the bottom for me. It starts from the student and then moves up. So all ideation, everything happens with the students. And I would urge all educators across to say, get your students in. Why do they have to wait for IIMs or their college, to say that now they're adults? I think children's minds are ticking and we need to catch them young.
Well, thanks for saying that's a great one. Children's minds are ticking and we need to catch them young. While I go to Neharika, I'd love to get some more questions from the audience. And if I had the privilege, I can see a large number of people in the audience, some very interesting people in the audience, including, I don't know if I wish I could cold call on some people. Professor Dheeraj Sanghi, you're there. I know Manika, you're in there somewhere. Vishal Shah, which is from Okuli. Lots of good people out there. Love to hear some questions and thoughts. And while I come to Neharika, you're now doing something completely different, right? You are stepped out of what you said was kind of the privileged space of IIM Ahmedabad, dealing with a much larger societal challenge of skills and how do you build skills with a larger majority of our young people. So tell us, what are the kind of skills that are needed to succeed in the real world? And I'll tell you, I don't know if some of you have been watching the Padlet, which is out there, and there's a question out there. What's the one thing educators must do to prepare Generation Z and Alpha for the world of work? Our audience is saying, develop a resilient and agile mindset, provide simulate real world situations and let them experience some of the pressures. Early exposure to success skills, expose them to the critical C's of communication, collaboration, creativity, help them navigate the world of mental health, and we'll come back to it in some time if we can. But tell us, what are those skills and how are you trying to teach them? Because a lot of people believe that the skilling industry hasn't really delivered on its promise.
Sure. Thank you again for the great question. I think in the time that I've spent, whether at IIM Ahmedabad or in the last 1 year, looking at what what it takes for people to be successful, irrespective of what work we do. While technical skills are really important, I think there is a large number of, as you rightly pointed out, skills that you can't really learn just by learning how, what the laws of thermodynamics are. While those are really important and they're crucial, but at the end of the day, you need skills such as emotional intelligence, you need skills such as, just as Parmesh is saying, as the world goes out, handling diversity, skills such as critical thinking, problem solving, and all of these. And I have been calling these what as the face the world skills. So we have possibly done a lot of teaching and training for preparing for the world of work, while we have really not looked at what does it take for any person to actually be part of the world. And of course, these are not rocket science skills, but they're just because they're not rocket science, sometimes they're also ignored. Nobody looks at it, nobody talks about it. I mean, in the name of let us say communication, I see a lot of it's about preparing somebody for an interview. Come on, interview you can't prepare for it. Your entire life should be your preparation for an interview. You shouldn't have to attend classes for preparing for an interview, but you should over the years learn how to express. And not to impress is what I often say. So there's a difference. I mean, when I speak, I can speak to express, I can speak to impress, I can, and there's a difference in the two. And if you see people who have not learned, who haven't deeply learned it, you will see more of the latter than the former. So what I'm saying is, yes, we definitely, there is a need for this, and also in India especially, and I think we have to keep the context in mind. In India especially, where the adults most two favorites words are chup raho and be careful. And these two words are possibly the worst words, right? Why chup raho and why be careful? And why can't I take a risk? And why can't I speak out my mind? Right? And so, in a patriarchal, in the kind of societies that we live in the homes that we have, I think there isn't enough emphasis on communication. I'm not talking about the 1% of our population. I'm talking about the larger part of our population. So I think as an educator who's trying to design programs at this point of time for not the 1%, but the rest of the population, I'm saying, how do I get people to learn to communicate with ease, not feel inferior when they start to communicate with somebody else, whether they know the language or not is never a matter. The second is to actually start looking at things such as, because we have been so focused on what is happening in the classroom, we have simply not looked out. We have not looked at our environment. We haven't looked at communities. So we are saying, can our education actually, can the education at the university be more focused on communicating with the community and the environment? And also, as Manika, I think, really nicely pointed out, can we have, something like a quality circle happening at every level in the college? Why should it be only something that the Japanese do for manufacturing? Why can't I have a quality circle which says, canteen ka food acha nahi hai, rather than complain about it? What can we do to make sure that the canteen food is palatable and edible for all of us? So problem solve rather than complain. Be a real part of the issue rather than be a side for the issue.
Correct.
So those are the kinds of things that I'm saying we possibly need to teach. And, honestly, we should have possibly just learned them. But since we aren't learning them, I guess educators like us will have to start paying more attention to it.
I have two alerts. One is that a bunch of really good audience questions have come in, and there's an alert that there are 5 minutes left. So here's what I will do. I'll put you all on a spot. I will throw a question at you, rapid fire, 15, 20-second responses so that we can get more of the audience questions about. And some of the people who I had cold called have started pouring in a question. Professor Dheeraj Sanghi asked, a lot of people thought that the upcoming generation will be very IT or tech savvy. I suspect that would strengthen the privilege of the privileged class. What should IIMA and other fine institutions do to spread the net wider for providing quality education? Assuming we'll put Neharika on the spot there.
So I don't think IMA in its architecture has the possibility of to go out to masses. We're too unique, we're too elite, we're too designed to do that. Yet I think, and this is not a criticism of IMA, because IMA does have a very high social conscious. It does try to do a number of things. But I think if we are trying to go out to the masses, I think technology is the answer for that as well. I just met this group of people who for the last 15 years have been doing English teaching for large number of people, and the name of the program is Bindas Bol. So they're using technology for that. They are by design creating diverse groups of people from Assam, from Orissa, from Delhi, from Rajasthan in the same group, and they have a facilitator who just facilitates people to speak confidently. Forget about language and all comes at. So I think it is the technology which is going to help us to reach out to a larger number of people. And I'm a huge fan of technology for masses. Today, using AI proctored exam, I can actually ensure that a student with a very, very, very basic smartphone can actually write a competitive exam for less than 80 rupees a cost. I think we've just got to get this technology more sophisticated.
Great. We have just 2 minutes, so I'll have to bring in Parmesh and Manika really quick.
Sorry.
Parmesh, somebody's asking a really interesting question, that how do you motivate the unmotivated, especially in the digital world where students are supposed to take responsibility for their own learning, especially in the world of video games, social media, Netflix?
Yes.
You have a lot of distractions, and sometimes motivation is hard.
Well, I disagree. I think storytelling is compelling. I think these are all just formats. McLuhan said the medium is not the message, and as true now as it was earlier. I wrote a book to compete with Instagram, to compete with Netflix, etc. And your storytelling has to evolve. And we are dealing with a generation of very smart people who are able to multitask, who are able to have complex narratives, who are able to simultaneously process complex narratives. So our teaching has to be that as well. Our teaching also has to be intersectional in that sense, right? So with young people especially, right? Everyone, Manika, Neharika, have all said, care deeply about issues, are interested in their own growth and learning, and very much about what the future holds. So how do we use this to design more compelling, more participatory, and more experiential systems in which people don't get bored? I think that is the onus. I mean, if Netflix can change the nature of storytelling and tell you whether it is in formats like start in the middle, flashback, flash forward, and things like that, and you're so hooked. I mean, I think there's no reason why education has to be caught in a time warp. So I think we will have to innovate, but ultimately the basic thing of what we do doesn't change, but you adapt to the format, and that's super exciting actually.
Thanks for saying that. Last one to Manika. You'll have to make it really quick. What should be the role of the teacher be in this changed world? Time up, and we'll end with a sentence from you.
Walk with your child, believe in that child, trust your judgment, trust the child, let the child explore, let your heart and head walk together. I think that sums it all up. Child centricity is the way forward. And
Thank you.
hold the children.
Thank you. With that very powerful message, hold the children, stay with the young people, understand their aspirations, lead with empathy, but at the same time, practice, as Neharika said, tough love so that they're ready for the real world. Thank you so much, Harappa, for giving us this opportunity to interact. We have a lot of audience questions which we would have loved to answer. And thank you, panelists and the audience, for a great conversation.
Thank you, Anustup.
Thank you,
Thank you so
Anustup, for
much.
a lovely,
Thank you,
for
Anustup.
a lovely moderation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to my co-panelists.
Thank you for such an eye-opening discussion, Anustup, Neharika, Parmesh, and Manika.